I'm going to turn it over to Bronson.
All right. Well, thank you guys for coming tonight. I appreciate you guys signing in tonight and taking a look at one of my passions, and that's log homes. We have a great presentation for you guys tonight, and a little bit of a live inspection and some of the common defects we see in log homes today. But up on your screen, you'll see kind of where log homes started in America. Log homes started around maybe 1630s, and they were immigrants coming to the country. They didn't have anything, and they came to the country. They were given land, and they had to make a quick shelter. And these are called trapper shacks. Most of these folks, most of these homes, they were one-room homes. And this is an example, a reproduction of a trapper shack here in Virginia. You can see that the wood, they used every parts of the wood. They used the bark for the roof line. They would fell trees directly on site and lay them together. They would take the mud and the straw and make that as your chinking. But they would really basically use everything on site, and that's how they would make these. They were very simple and very easy to construct for them. Here's what they call a saddle joinery. And joineries, and we'll go through a little bit of this on how to tell the difference between different types of joinery. This particular joinery here there's some rot going on here where moisture is actually wicking in from the end of the log and coming right in, and what's happening is it's basically failing. And so these logs are going to start to compress on each other, and as that happens, you're going to see some issues with the roof line as well. So again, they would use bark here, and they would shave off anything they can to make the roof line. I took Hollis and Sean out today to a nice museum out here in Virginia, in Stanton, Virginia, and they actually had thatched roofs, and so they would use that as well. So a lot of people ask me this question. So if you look at old pictures of Abraham Lincoln's childhood home, this is what you see. This is very similar to what he had. The chimney is built this way. The chimney is built to kind of fall away from the house, because it's not a matter of if these were gonna have a chimney fire. It was a matter of when. And so basically what would happen is they'd have a chimney fire, the fire would burn the wood, and the chimney would fall away from the house without basically burning up the house as well. Sometimes it would burn up the house as well, and they'd have to start from scratch, but oftentimes the chimney would just fall away from the house. We added this picture because although this doesn't look like a log home, it really truly is a log home. This particular house was built in 1795, and they basically squared off both ends of the log itself and added siding. So again, more joinery here. The joinery here, this is called a dovetail joinery. This is considered one of the strongest joineries that you can have. In order to replace one side of this log, or if you had an issue with the log end, you basically have to start from the top and work your way down. These are very, very expensive to repair, very expensive to fix. The average cost of a repair for a log end is right at about $500 a log. These are looking at it right at about $1,000 a log to fix if you're to get these, but they are the strongest log ends you can have because they're not going to move laterally or horizontally. This is a saddle joinery, and this is, again, an old saddle joinery. This particular house we're looking at was built between 1795 and 1860. There are actually two houses joined together. But the saddle joinery, you can see the top notch and the top section of the log, they fit perfectly together. The problem with this joinery here is that it's flush on the end, so there's no overhang like you would see on a modern day kit home. And the problem with that is water will enter the top side of that log end, and it doesn't matter how old the log is, the log still retains some capillary effect. And so with that said, water will enter the end of that log and then just wick right on into the log itself and cause some rot. you can see here that there has been some rot and some damage, but it's been repaired nicely. There are some areas of chinking that has been recently applied, and this is new world versus old world type of chinking, and that's the trying to fill the space between the logs itself. So again, this is a very old log home here. This is a dovetail again, and dovetails again are very, very strong. There was no give or no bow in this wall that you would normally see on some older log homes. You're going through this pretty quickly. So, there's a lot of slides. There's a lot of slides. So you can see where the actual joinery itself has kind of sandwiched on itself, and it's a log home is a living, breathing entity. So it expands and contracts due to the weather. The humidity has a strong effect on the log home itself. And so the joinery at the ends, because that creates the strongest point of your load-bearing wall, that has to be secure. And that's why this particular dovetail is one of the strongest types of joinery you can have. You can do the next slide. So this is a great slide. Am I on video, or is it they're just seeing this?
They can see you.
They can see me. Okay, good. So this.
Okay. Smile at the camera.
Smile. So this particular slide is great. So you see the hand-hewn logs, and these were done in 1850, and you can see a modern-day repair both at the top of the slide and at the bottom. Now I'll discuss a little later on how you grade logs and how you take a look at logs, and historic log restoration, as in what we see here, is quite a bit more expensive than a modern day kit log home. But you can see how it's spliced in nicely. They use dowel rods, wood dowel rods to splice these in. They do not use metal, and we'll discuss a little later why metal is not a good thing to use. So this is another good form of joinery. This particular joinery that you're going to see is called a button pass. And so the log ends that you see the log adjacent to that is butted up against that log end. And a button pass is going to be probably the most common joinery that you would see on modern day kit homes. This particular log end, they have different names for logs. They have a D log, an H log. They have a double D. Some people call it a round log. This particular log is called a D log, and it's round on one side, and so it'll be round on the outside and then it's square on the inside. The house that we're actually in currently is a D log configuration. The beauty of a D log configuration is that you can hang pictures and things on the inside of the living space. The inside of the envelope of the house is nice and flat and flush, and the outside looks like a log home traditionally would. This particular log end, though, you have notches on the top and bottom. This particular house that we're in has a notch on the top and bottom, and they would throw some baccarat in that notch, and it would fit together basically like Lincoln logs or Lego would. What we have there is what you want to look for in the log ends is rot in those channels. Water will tend to form in those channels and seep down to the center of the log, which is the most vulnerable part of the log, and then rot from the inside out. You can also see under the bottom side of those channels, you can see a little bit of frass and basically poop. That's carpenter bees. Got to take a look at those as well. Carpenter bees can be very destructive, but it's actually the woodpecker that gets in after the larva that is more destructive. Next slide. All right, so this is a round log, full round log. This is part of that trapper shack that we were talking about earlier. You can see the upward facing check, which is the check at the top of the log itself. And that allows water to enter all the way to the center and cause rot. In this case, we have a little bit of everything going on here. Because these logs were felled on site, they weren't kiln dried, they weren't treated, and so we have a little bit of wood borers in this on the very ends, the outsides of that log, as well as moisture taking place. So all of these things are something that you'd want to take a look at when you're taking a look at a log home, and it doesn't matter what age log you're looking at. This is two different types of log homes here, and so part of that house was built in the 1700s, and part of it was built in the 1800s. And so the 1700s is on the right-hand side, and these two houses were kind of sandwiched together somewhere between the 1890s. They were sandwiched together. The log on the right is a saddle log, and that was the late 1700s. And then the 1800s, early 1800s or late 1800s was the one on the left. And that is a post and notch. Some people call it a post and notch, but basically it's a vertical post, and the log ends would sandwich up against that vertical post, and then you would have dowel rods, and you can kind of see the dowel rods showing there, and those would go all the way with a hand auger as far as they can go, and that's what would hold the log into the vertical post. Now, the unfortunate side of this is the logs move and expand and contract, and they found later on that this really wasn't an ideal type of joinery at the corner. This is a really close up. This is a kit home. It's an H style, so we're looking at the outside of the wall itself, and what you're looking at is called checking. And this is a check mark. Some log home contractors call them check marks. Some call them checking. I just call it checks. But they're cracks. They're natural cracks that form in logs, whether it's a kit home, a natural log home that you would have. These particular checks form, they expand and they contract. They can become larger, it depends on the grade of the log. But you always want to keep an eye out on these and where the checks are facing. If you look, and you need a high-power flashlight, you look inside the check, and if the check is going down towards the ground, then you want to make sure that you probe that area for rot. If this were a D log and not an H log, you would want to make sure that it's on the lower, the larger checks are on the lower side of that log instead of on the upward facing log. The upward facing log, they almost always allow water to get into the log itself. So this is powder post beetles. This was underneath the log home that we were showing to you that was built between the 1790s. And so powder post beetles here in Virginia, and every log home inspections is different all over the country because you're going to have different climates, different types of bugs. I had an email from a guy that in Florida that actually inspected a log home, was thanking me for the article. I had no idea they had log homes in Florida. However, they have a lot of termite issues. Up here in Virginia and some of the northern states, you have powder post beetles, wood borers, termites, carpenter ants, carpenter bees. All of these things cause weakness to the structural stability of the log. Here's some wood borers, kind of an example of wood borers here, along with some checking. This is a really old log. This log is, this was the 1700s log, early 1700s log, so it's really super old. A lot of this was old damage, not going to have any issues. The problem with this restoration was they handmade some wood furniture on site from the wood. Wasn't cured. They brought that inside, introduced that new furniture into heat. Then we have another bug issue. So they had to retreat by tenting this house. Again, another example of wood borers and powder post beetles. And you can see kind of the difference. The wood borers are going to be much larger in diameter on the holes, and the powder post beetles are kind of like pinholes. I worked a long time with a pest inspector, and he would just tap on this. If frass came out of the holes, he knew that it was most likely active. But again, this is really old stuff here. Probably happened years and years ago, probably 100 years ago, and has done all it's going to do. You do probe these areas to see if it's just superficial damage or it's gone even further. And we'll discuss a little bit later when we talk about tools on how to kind of determine what's going on with the log from the outside in. So this was, again, that 1700s house, and you can see the rafters there. The rafters are mortise and tenon joinery, perfectly joined there. But what we're missing there are collar ties. And collar ties are what's going to join the rafters together, so it's not adding undue stress to the outside load-bearing walls. In new kit homes, you want to pay special close attention to whether or not they have collar ties there or any bracing there. A lot of times, newer construction, newer kit homes, they want that open feel, and so they'll purposely leave out those necessary elements. And then the roof line itself is going to be weighing on those front and rear load-bearing walls, which create a lot of instability. And that's kind of what's going on here. There was some deflection in the walls in this, but again, we're talking about a 200-plus-year-old house. So we'll talk about a little bit later on a new kit home that has some issues with some exterior load-bearing wall failure or movement. This is a really, really close-in look at a mortise and tenon joinery on the rafters. This was a great example of what they did back then and how long it lasts. I mean, this hasn't moved, it hasn't budged in well over 200 years. We can't get new construction to do what they did back then. It's amazing. So this is actually, believe it or not, two houses in one. This was that house that has a dovetail corner joinery on the left-hand side and a saddle joinery, on the right-hand side. This house was, again, built between the 1700s and the 1800s, put together, made one large house. And this was what you would typically find in America. These particular houses were not in Europe. This was a style that they kind of meshed all, because the United States is a melting pot of the world, they kind of meshed all those different building techniques into one, and this is what we came up with. Again, another example of rot here. And the unfortunate side of this is the restoration person that did this decided, instead of taking out the rot that was there and increasing and beefing up the log integrity, they just added more chinking. In order to add more chinking, if you were to scrape this out, they put twigs in between there. Nowadays, they put back a rod and then fill that within a caulk and then a movable rubberized chinking. Back then, they would use anything they could, a lime concrete slurry. They would do anything they possibly could to make that. But unfortunately, all that's going to do is crack out the more rot that happens there. So this is on older log homes versus the one that we're currently sitting in. Older log homes, if you ever look up in the houses, the house is built between the 16, 17, 1800s, and you see this on the exterior wall, these log ends that are kind of protruding out from a load-bearing wall, either front and rear, mostly on a house. These log ends that you see are signifying a second floor. So anytime you see this, you know that there is a second floor. Sometimes I've seen these on log homes that were built between those times, and I know that there's a second floor, but they've either gotten rid of the second floor, or they've covered it up, or they've removed them and left the log ends there. But always look for that second floor, but pay close attention to rot in these areas, because these log ends and how they're sitting on the load-bearing wall is what holds up the second floor flooring system. So on this, in the corner next to the bench is a hand auger. A hand auger was used before there were drills, power drills, and they would auger all the way in a nice, perfectly round hole. It took a lot of work. Probably the youngest person that was the strongest, and that's what they would join the logs together with a dowel rod by drilling that hole. In the center of that is what they call a draw knife. And so when they would fell the logs on site, they would use that draw knife and they would put it on a log horse, and we have a picture of that somewhere. But the log horse, they'd have the log set up, they'd straddle the log, and they'd use this draw knife and draw the log toward, or draw the knife towards you on that log, and that would remove any of the bark. But it was also shape the log, any knot holes, or any protruding abnormalities with the log, they would be able to shave that off with that draw knife. That's a flat adze. the closest to you on the bench, and that was made to split the wood. And I think we've got a picture of that as well. Again, a hand auger. That hand auger, that is a half moon bit, and it was basically as crude as you can possibly be. So that's an adze there, closest to us. Obviously, everybody knows a shovel. There's a couple of axes there, but the adze there, once the log is shaped with the draw knife, they would use the adze to cut in any type of joinery. So if they wanted to do a Swedish coat, which is kind of a moon shape on the bottom and top of the log, so that it mushes back together, they would use an adze like that. They would also use an adze if they wanted to shape the log from a round log to a square log. So that's called a log horse. Again, everything on the site back then was made right on site. So they fell a tree and then use that draw knife. They'd saddle that log horse and use that draw knife to take off all that bark. So this is a great example of they felled a tree, they've taken off the bark, and they're using those splitting mauls to split that tree down, and that's what's going to make your log walls. And they'll use the adze in order to kind of clean all of that rough area up.
What Bronson was telling you earlier is that we came down here to Stanton, Virginia. Sean and I drove down earlier today and toured a museum of old homes. So a lot of these buildings were brought over from England and well, from Europe, some from Germany, and erected here in Stanton. So we got a chance to go around there and get a bunch of these pictures. And as you can tell, we were putting our PowerPoint together up to the very last minute. I think some of you actually sat in while we were doing some of that. I didn't realize you were observing us. Y'all let us know when you're ready. You guys ready?
Yeah, we're ready. We're ready.
Okay. So I'm going to turn it back over to Bronson and Sean, and y'all are going to take a little tour.
So some of the basic tools that you would have to inspect a log home, you see some things that you're familiar with, and some things you might see on the table and you might have some question marks about. So we'll start off with the level. I brought an antique level here because we're talking about log homes, and I feel like antique is a really good thing. So this is the antique level. However, you can do a 3-foot would probably be the minimum level that you want. I choose a 4-foot level. I like the longer levels because it's going to give you an accurate reading over a longer span on the log itself, the wall. I like a good camera that zooms in really good. That way you can add any issues that you're not able to get to with a ladder. On the exterior of the home, you can do high definition video. And when you're talking about log homes and pricing out log homes, high definition videos or the high definition pictures are a must because you can translate that to the log home contractor, and they love that. This sponge, I use two things, and I don't have a spray bottle here, but I use a sponge as well. And the sponge, come on over here. So the sponge, you wet it, and you find a part of the log itself, and this is generally done on the outside of the log. And so you dab the outside of the log, and if the finish, what protects the log on the outside, if it's intact, the water will bead right up. A spray bottle will do the same thing. If the finish is deteriorated or weathered, you'll see the moisture kind of wick right into the log itself, and it'll stain the log. Not permanently, obviously, it's just water, but you'll be able to tell your client that, hey, it needs to be refinished, and write that accordingly in your report. So we'll go back. Another thing is masking tape. I'm moving too fast or slow, I apologize. So the masking tape is the same thing. I keep a little roll of masking tape when I'm doing log homes right on my work belt. So you tear off a little bit of masking tape, and you roll a little bit around your fingers, and you dab the outside of the logs itself. And if any of that that finish comes off on the masking tape, then you know that the masking tape is, or that you know that the finish has failed. It's what good older log home contractors do. It's not invasive to the log home itself, but it's a great tool to use, and I get a lot of good comments on this when I do log home inspections. Obviously, a pick, I use an ice pick for log homes versus a screwdriver. I don't like to make holes or cause any damage to the log home when I'm taking a look at that. But come on over with me, Sean. If you're looking at a log home, it's pretty dark here. I'd like to take you to see the outside of the log. Can we do that?
We can.
We can try it.
I got a strong flashlight.
Okay. When you're looking at an outside, so I use the pick for two different reasons. So if you have rot, there's a dull, hollow sound when you're tapping on it. You're not tapping on it enough to cause any damage or dimples in the wood itself, but you're tapping on it light enough. You should hear it should sound nice and crisp. The pick itself, you're just picking the log ends. You're not causing any damage to inspect those log ends. You're just picking it for softness, and you're able to point out any of those areas that may be a problematic area for moisture, termites, wood-destroying insects, that kind of stuff. We'll go back to the table here. Good high-powered flashlights. When you're looking at log homes, especially to look inside of checks, log ends, any opening that's really tight that is nice and dark. I particularly like this flashlight here for log homes. It's 1600 lumens, rechargeable. It's bright. It's a very bright flashlight, but you're able to see anything and everything. It might even be able to see through the log itself. I'm joking. Nice thermal cameras here. We have a portable thermal camera. This is a little more expensive of a thermal camera, but again, those are able to see any potential moisture or leaking that you would have between the butt ends of the logs, or where the one log sits on another. You'll see any drafts that come through those logs. These are great tools to use. On some kit homes, larger kit homes, where they're incorporating kiln-dried logs with natural logs, in some log homes that you inspect, they do that. And in order to combat the movement, the natural movement of the logs, the expansion and contraction due to heat, humidity, rainfall, what have you, they have to put jacks in between the natural logs and the vertical logs, or the kiln-dried logs with the vertical and the horizontal logs. And so that jack will be there. And a lot of times they conceal these jacks because they're a metal jack with all thread, with nuts, and a plate. And you don't necessarily want to see that in a nice, beautiful log home. So they'll conceal that in some wood trim. So I use this to kind of take a look to see if they're present. It's just a mirror, telescopes out. You'll see these at the base of any log home in a basement, crawl space, right at the top of the foundation wall. You'll see those jacks there as well. And that's just to combat movement, because again, a log home is a living, breathing entity. So it expands, it contracts, it moves, it twists, it does a lot of things, and you need to be ready for that. So you have a couple different types of moisture meters here. I have a meter just like this. This is actually Sean's meter. This is a really nice meter named by Fleer. It does humidity, which is good for log homes. You have your external probes. I use the Protometer Survey Master as well. It also has probes. Any moisture meter that has a probe is a good thing, a good tool to use. Wind-driven rains, higher altitude houses where wind-driven rains is an issue, where water is constantly pelting one side of the house, what will happen is water will enter either the butt ends of that or around windows, around doors. And so you need to make sure whether it's old stains, new stains, and be able to report as such. I had to add this because Sean wanted me to add the Jackhawk 9000 handmade knife that I made. I really don't use this on log homes, but he wanted to add it. So let's move on. Oh, last but not least, pan over to this. And if you're really in trouble and you really need something to take a look at, you need to go to May 2019 ASHI Reporter, and you can read the log home. And this will give you all the history of the log home. It'll give you different types of logins. My tool list is in here as well. So if you have an issue with that, I think Sean, did you post the link to this?
Yes.
So Sean posted the link to this, and it'll give you reasons why I use certain tools. So I didn't bring my compass. A lot of smartphones have a compass on them, but a compass is a good method to figure out where the house is situated, where rain typically comes from, how the sun is beating on one side of the house versus the other side of the house. And you're seeing the log ends protruding through the exterior front wall, and that's signifying what the house has a second floor. This particular house, and most log houses today, do not use the load-bearing wall and pocket those floor joists in. What they'll do is they'll use metal brackets, and that's kind of what we see here. All right. So like we were talking about before, this particular log home is a D log, which means it's round on the outside and flat on the inside. I like these type of logs because really the R value of the log home is very low. You're not able to get a lot of insulation with the logs. There is some type of thermal value, but it's very, very small. And so a D log where it's flat on the inside, it allows you to put frame strips and add some insulation if you'd like to do that in the future, but then you would lose the look of the natural log inside of your home. Upstairs, we can show you what that kind of looks like, and basically they've added tongue and groove so that it still gives you that natural look. But I'm going to take my level, and we'll take a few things here in a light. So I want to take you over to this log, and again, this log I saw for the first time, and I basically walked into the house and I wanted to inspect the house as if I'm inspecting it for a client, even though this is not a client of mine, this is a friend of mine's house. But I started to see some things right away with this house. So is this too bright? Can you guys see that? Hollis, can you see that in the screen?
That's good.
Okay, so what we're looking at here, you have some checking, and you have the cracks here, which these are normal. But what I am seeing are moisture stains that are running down. And so this, I believe, is a southern facing wall. We get a lot of rain from this area. So this particular side of the house gets wind-driven rain a lot. Okay. Is that better?
Less glare, yeah.
Less glare. Okay. So you can see the rain, or you can see the water droplets there. And so what's happening is the wind is driving that rain against the house, and it's pushing the rain through the butt ends, through the butt ends here of the logs. And that's one of the most vulnerable parts. So the butt ends of the logs, the top and the bottom ends of the logs, as well as around windows and doors, are the most vulnerable parts of the log home when it comes to moisture. Moisture is almost always a contributing factor to any log home failure. When you start to see this, I run a thermal camera over top of this. I also run a moisture meter over top of this. And then I look again outside to see what's causing this. I saw right away that we had an opening in a butt joint that's causing the moisture to enter the side here. Now, with log homes, and I'll show you a difference here, if I can turn this off. So log homes, here, thanks. So because there's not a good ventilation, there's not a really good method to bring outside air in, inside air out, and have a good even exchange, you can get some condensation buildup in a log home. So what you're going to want to do is run a side light on any furniture, all the logs itself. Any side light like that will pop that mildew right off of the furniture, and you want to report on that. But when you see moisture stains on a wall like this, you want to determine whether or not it's condensation or moisture coming from the outside. So I just showed you guys what it looks like for moisture coming from the outside in and what that stain looks like. Over in the kitchen, I want to show you guys what it looks like for condensation that has built up on some of the metal brackets and is coming down.
So Bronson, we have a question.
Okay.
So someone wanted to know, do you get water, and I think you just answered that question, do you get water in from the outside through the check?
Absolutely. You can. Well, not necessarily the check, unless the check is so bad where it's rotted all the way through. And I do have a picture of that. We can bring a picture of that up on what it looks like, a really bad check that has resulted in moisture all the way through the log. But normally you're not going to get much moisture from the check. You're going to get it from the butt ends and from the top and the bottom of the logs where the logs join together. But good question. So if you can see the top here, where's my laser? It's way over there. So there we go. All right, a little technical difficulty, but right here, you can see, I don't know if you guys can see that, I hope you can, but right there in that spot there is where condensation has built up on these brackets due to cooking food, taking showers. There's a little bit over there if you can see it, and it's kind of run down the log. It takes on a different effect to the log. It's more superficial and it's not as dark in color. See, when water is being pushed through the log, the water actually, it starts to take on a lot of the dirt and grime from the outside, as well as the caulks and the sealants that they use on the outside. It actually pushes through the log. So moisture that's coming from the outside in is going to turn the logs kind of dark color, a blackish hue to it. Versus condensation like this is going to be more superficial. So, nope. There we go. So, bringing back, we talked a little bit earlier about removing rafter ties, and I want to show you guys over here a little bit. So you have a vaulted ceiling, and a lot of times what you'll have are rafter ties, and they'll come across here and they'll join the roof so that the apex of the roof isn't pushing undue stress on the outside of the walls. So you need something to bridge that gap. And so if there's nothing there to bridge that gap, the weight of the roof pushes on the exterior walls and the exterior walls come out with it. So the roof comes down, the exterior walls come out. And so one of the very first things that I do, and Sean, you're right up against it, is I take a look at the front door. This is a really good test. This particular wall is flush, it is sound, there is no movement to this wall, but the front entry door tells the tale. Can you guys see me okay?
It's a little dark.
A little dark?
But I think
We'll make do. But all you gotta do is open the door. And if the door doesn't open or shut on its own, you know that this wall is nice and flush. If the wall has moved because of any issue with the roof adding undue stress and load to the exterior wall, which the front wall or the front door is almost always on that load-bearing wall, that stress wall. If it's coming in, this door will open all the way up on its own, and if it's bowing out, which normally happens, the door will shut on its own. And so that's one of the first things you do. The second thing you want to do, and I'm taking this old level, you want to put it right on the trim, and then you're going to want to see whether or not this is flush and nice and true. And if it's not, you want to report on it, and you want to figure out why this particular wall is doing that. So once you get it on a flat piece of trim, you're going to want to go over to the log itself and see if the log itself tells the same tale as the trim. Oftentimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes they frame the door in incorrectly, or they may have a measurement off a little bit. So you want to do both. You want to take a reading with your 3 or 4 foot level on your log itself and on the door trim. You do this on windows as well. I do this on the inside and outside of the walls. So come on over here. We've got more light on this wall. You have a good time? You got we're beating through our time really quick. This particular wall here has bowed. And it's a normal bow that I'm seeing in the wall. You can put your level up to it, and it is off. It's off, you can see it here. It's off about an inch. I don't know if you guys can see that or not. You can see that? So it's off about an inch. So that means the wall has bowed out slightly. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's a structural defect, but you want to figure out why that is. And so they're having this particular beam here that separates the flooring system. There's some stress load on this wall. But again, I didn't see anything added on the outside. And on the outside, it was pretty flush. So it may be just a defect in the log itself. Now, part of grading the log itself, there are several companies that grade the log. And in my article, I mentioned one company that grades the log. And they grade the log, part of how they grade the log are how many knots are in the log itself, how many current checks or cracks are in the log, how far spaced the grain is, and the slope. The slope has everything to do with a log, separating it from high quality log to a lower quality log. And basically the slope is how the grain, well, you can really see it here. So this check goes from here to here. So you've got a check starting way up here and ending way down here. So the slope of this is very low. So this would be a slope of a 112 or possibly a 212. So this is a higher quality log. Now, if you see the slope of the grain very tight, so like a 1 in 6 or a 1 in 5, that means the log when it was growing as a tree, it had a lot of twist in the grain. Unfortunately, with twist in the grain like that, when they fell the tree and shake the tree and then kiln dry it and they take all the moisture out, what that log will want to do is untwist itself. And so lower end logs will twist and move and not remain flush with itself. So you'll get everybody's seen a deck post that is twisted. And so those are lower grade wood that's trying to twist itself out of its natural element. And so a log home will do that same thing. So you want to make sure that when you're making recommendations, let's say you have a whole log that needs to be replaced. And again, for a cheap log, you're looking at about $500 a log, to a more expensive $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 a log. But you're going to want to take a look and make sure that they get the right type of log for the house. There isn't any one log that fits every house. There's not a universal log. But you're going to want to make sure that you request that a qualified licensed log home contractor do the repairs with the right type of log that is the right grade log for this house. Because I've seen where they've taken out an old log and put in a cheaper log as a repair, and then less than a year later, that log twists itself out, and then you have rot and separation and gapping and moisture penetration and all that kind of stuff, and it's not a good scenario.
I got a question for you, Bronson.
Sure.
Is that fungal activity, organic growth, whatever you want to call
It sure is.
it? You guys see that? Get your bright flashlight out.
So you want to pop a good side light on this log, and you can see where that fungal growth pops right off the log. So that's a good find, Sean. And so you can do this on you can see it down there as well. So if you don't side light it, you're not going to be able to see it as well. And side lighting it and taking a picture of it, it really adds definition to the picture to add to your reports. So that's again, that has to do with poor air quality and poor airflow within the house, and the fact that a log home, it allows more moisture from the outside and more influence from the outside to penetrate inside.
And that's that same wall where we saw the water stand.
That's the same wall where we saw the water stains coming through the butt joints. So should we try to go outside and take a look at the end?
Let's do it. So we need to switch to that audio.
Okay.
Because this mic won't pick us up when we go outside. So everybody hang with us while we figure out the technical issues here.
You can take a look at the deer in the process.
No idea how to work this thing. Okay, well, you have to just put it on speaker, right? Can you, Bronson?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll listen in here and see if you got it.
Let's see. Can you guys hear me?
Go ahead and try it now, Bronson. Let me hear.
Can you guys hear me?
Close the door. Make sure you're not picking up this mic in here. No, we cannot hear you. We do not hear you. We do not hear you. Does anybody hear
Now
me?
can you hear me?
Aha, got it.
Yes. All right.
Yes.
Can you see okay? Can you guys see the picture okay? Yes. All right. All right. So we have, sorry, didn't mean to shine it right in your eyes. So we're in business. So again, it's like super dark out here. I apologize. But given the time of night in Virginia, here we go. So again, we talked about this being a D log. So it's flat on the outside, or flat on the inside, round on the outside. And so looking at this log here, you have your checks, and they really did a poor job of caulking this. They used regular exterior caulk for this. Because this is overhanging in a porch, it doesn't make much of a difference. Use that light. Use that light. Is that better? Yeah. Okay. So it doesn't make much of a difference, but if this were exposed to the elements, this caulk would deteriorate really quickly. It's not really an ideal caulk for log homes. Again, log homes expand and contract greatly. It's kind of why they put joints in vinyl siding so it can go back and forth. But that's log homes like that in checks. They open and close, expand and contract. And so you need a caulk that does that too. This caulk is very, very hard, so it's not able to expand and contract like it should. So let's go over here to the log end. Oh, this is great here. And so they use correct caulk. So this is pliable caulk that is for log homes. Probably a log home contractor came out here and repaired this, and then they came over here with incorrect caulk. And really, it doesn't matter under a porch like this. It's not a big deal. It's on your exterior walls that get most of the wind-driven rains. That is a big issue. So on this log end here, I don't know how we can do this where you can see me. So, all right. So, let's see. All right. We're moving furniture to get to this. So this log in here, you can really see the definition of the D here. Can you guys see that? Yeah, there we go. So you can really see the definition of the D. So again, round on the outside, flat on the inside. Square, it's going to be flat on both sides, and then you have a round or a double D, so it's round on both sides. But anyways, you'll see a notch here, and again, it fits in together just like Lincoln logs or Legos, and you know that this is a kit home because it has these notches, and everything is uniform. Every log is uniform. Every log is the same. But you really want to pay attention to these log ends here. And so these upward facing checks, not necessarily these side checks here, but these upward facing checks here, water will tend to get right in here and go right to the center of the log. It'll rot from the inside out. And so part of what you want to do, you want to tap on that log end, and you want to hear and listen for hollow, rotten sounds. And fortunately, they've kept up with this house pretty well. I don't have an example other than pictures of what that looks like. But you're going to want to take a look at that. Now, up underneath this one log here, I don't know if you guys can see it, but there's a lot of carpenter bees. And again, we talked about carpenter bees and how they can be destructive to log homes. And really, the biggest issue with carpenter bees is the woodpeckers that get in there and kind of search for the larvae, and they will just peck and damage everything that they can possibly do. I think we have a question there. Maybe. Where's the questions? Oh, we got a lot of questions. I can hear you.
Oh, yes, we hear you.
Yeah, okay, they're not questions. Does moisture ever enter? Okay. Well, you guys aren't doing a lot of questions, but that's okay. We'll keep it going. So, because this is a kit home, this is what they call a button pass. So this particular log here goes into and butts up against this log here, and the bottom run is a pass. So it passes right past the joinery here. So a button pass, it's not a bad way of joinery. It's not the strongest method, but when you're talking about notching these together and fitting them together, like kind of like tongue and groove, it becomes a strong connection.
Hey, Jeff, we're in Stanton, Virginia. Was the question. Where are we?
Stanton, Virginia. Actually, we're in Swope, Virginia.
Swope.
Yeah,
Okay.
or Swoopy.
Swoop.
It's a village in Virginia. But you can see here where some of these edges here are nice and tight, and some of these have spaced. And again, that's the expansion and contraction of the logs. We're moving into winter, and so in Virginia, we're getting drastic temperature changes between daylight and nighttime. And so,
Talk about signs of borate treatment, pros and cons.
well, the cons are for that type of treatment are there can be some deterioration to the wood, but it almost always etches and almost always stains the wood. They don't normally do that anymore, but it does the trick.
And then connection to the foundation. We can go look at that.
Connection to the foundation. Well, I don't know that we can we go around and look?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's take a look. Good question. We might be getting too far away from the hotspot, though.
Oh.
Yeah. All right, so we'll talk about it.
Okay.
Because I think we're going to lose connection if we do too much there.
Okay.
Well, we can try it.
Why don't you try it?
Okay.
We'll try it.
I'll listen if we lose.
Okay. Come on with me. We are in bear country, and we have a lot of bear right now activity. So we have to keep an eye out. We're in the middle of the mountains here.
You got that knife on you, right?
Yeah, well, I don't have a jack on
Oh.
now.
We're screwed.
We're screwed. So on kit homes versus standard log homes, are we doing well?
You're doing
So
fine.
far, so good.
Yeah.
So in kit homes versus standard log homes, you have this half round. And so this half round, you can kind of see it's cut here. And so they frame out the flooring system the exact same way that they would do any conventional stick frame house. And then they build up from that, and then they lay their first their first log, and that's their starter course. That starter course is well anchored, and so with kit homes, they're going to use rebar. They're going to use what else would they use?
Rebar.
Carriage bolts. They're gonna use this starter course, and they're gonna go all the way down to the foundation, and that's gonna lock the starter course in here. And then they build it from there. And again, it's like Lincoln Logs or Legos when they build these things. But that's how they're gonna start here, and then they're just gonna work their way down. But these are actually false. These aren't logs here. These are just a facade to cover the framing that's below it.
What's that metal for?
With metal? Oh, this is the flashing. This is a termite shield. Yeah. Good question. Was that your question or somebody else's question?
Sure.
Sure. Okay. So this is your termite shield. And kind of what we have to do with log homes.
Yep.
They're highly susceptible to bugs.
What kind of
Here you go. Take a
what
look
kind
at
of foundation does this have? This is
Can you guys see that? So that's a carpenter bee, and that's going right in through the log end itself, and so it'll go in and then take a hard left or right and go all the way in and
follow the grain.
follow the grain. Now, a lot of this leads me to my next point. Carpenter bees feel the wood grain with their feet, and so a good trick of the trade when you're talking about getting rid of, because it's hard to get rid of carpenter bees. So they'll take clear shellac and smooth out underneath of these surfaces under the log ends or any overhang, and they'll put a really high, thick layer of shellac there so that when the carpenter bees get up against that, they can't feel the wood grain and they're going to go somewhere else. And so that's a good way. There's other traps. There's over the market, over the counter traps you can get. Amazon, Lowe's has started to sell these carpenter bee traps. But really, making sure that this is nice and smooth underneath of it is the best deal. We've got a train coming.
Yeah. How about roof overhang and log ends?
Roof overhang. Well, we talked about log ends.
I think they meant on the roof, but
Okay. So rafter tails, is that right? So rafter tails and the roof overhang. The larger the roof overhang, the better. Unfortunately, it's not cosmetic appealing. And so on this one, you can see it's got 1.5 foot overhang, and so that's really good. Ideally, we'd like a larger overhang because that's going to shield some of these log walls, these exterior load-bearing walls, from the elements outside. So how about you want to go back inside?
hold on. There's one more
We got
question.
more questions.
Oh, you want an overhang past the log ends? I was told 3 foot minimum.
Well, ideally, yes. You do want a large overhang over the log ends, ideally. Cosmetically, a lot of kit homes don't do it because it just doesn't look good.
So I don't know if you can see that light's right in the way,
Yeah.
but
Let's look up down here.
there you go. It does overhang, but it's definitely not 3 feet.
And again, ideally, you would like the overhang to be much further away from those log ends, or much further overhanging those log ends to kind of shield those log ends. Those generally are the most vulnerable parts of the log, or those ends, because again, the ends of the log, that's the capillary effect, and they've had logs that were 700, 800 years old, and they're still wicking moisture from the outside in. That capillary effect is still alive and well. But again, large overhangs are not cosmetically appealing. Therefore, architects of these kit homes, they just won't do them.
And I imagine the lower logs are going to be more problematic. Those are the ones you really want to pay attention to.
They are, because you get a lot of splashback. I think somebody asked what type of foundation this was. It's a concrete block foundation. Very typical in Virginia. There's other places that don't do this.
Crawl space?
Crawl space, yeah, we're not going to go in there.
Okay. That's fine with me.
Come on,
There's
do
probably
it.
a bear in
Do
there.
it.
Um,
Do it.
a lot of kit home. What's that?
I thought Hollis was talking, but I can't
Do
hear
it.
you, Hollis.
Do it.
Let's move on in.
Okay.
A lot of kit homes, they don't want you to put gutters on, and unfortunately, the gutter is what helps that splashback or prevention of splashback. Splashback happens when the water from the roof runs into a sheet, and the sheet splashes back. The sheet of water splashes back onto the lower part of the log itself, and so you can get rot and deterioration on the lower courses of the logs.
Cool.
Cool. All right. So we'll move
Now, you don't
on.
want to mute the mic or we're going to get feedback.
All right.
That's-
Mute the mic.
All right.
Okay. And so,
So we have 15, 20 more minutes if you want to keep on going.
15 minutes?
15
Okay.
minutes.
Oh, there's a bear coming through the door. I'll Hopefully they find us.
Here's our host. Our
This is
host
our
just
host.
arrived.
Everybody say thank you.
How many people do we have
Yeah.
signed up?
33.
All right.
33 right now.
So I want to show you guys this post here. And so this post holds a lot of weight. This goes all the way down to the center beam into the crawl space. A lot of times you'll have a basement here and it'll go all the way down. This is what's supporting the brunt of the weight with the loft here and everything up above. You get a lot of movement between this center post and these braces here. And so a lot of times they'll put a jack there. And we talked about that jack before and how there's a screw there, and it allows this top section to move independently from the load-bearing walls on the front and rear, but also allow you to adjust for that movement. So it can go up and down, left and right. Some of these jacks. A good show to watch for this would be Treehouse Masters. They've created this thing called the tabs, and the tabs allows them to drill into the wood itself and allow for the floor joist to sit but independently move from that anchor point. And a lot of these jacks will do the same thing or have the capability of doing that, so that you can have some of that movement and play with the house as the house is expanding and contracting without causing any adverse effects. Because if you don't equate or allow for that movement, then you can have some movement on this front wall, but not allowing the movement on the back wall, and you can get separation in the center.
How often do you have to turn the screw?
Well, it depends on the house. It depends on the climate. And so if you're not keeping the house at a constant humidity, a constant temperature, and you're allowing, like for instance, Virginia, we got up to, I don't know, 50, 60 degrees today as the high, and we're getting right down to in the 40s. So you're having these drastic temperature changes. And so the logs itself creates the envelope of the house, and because there's not a whole lot of insulating factor in a log home, then you get a lot of movement. So you get a lot of that adjustment. So it really depends on the house. It depends on the area in which the house is sitting, whether it's in New Hampshire versus Florida versus Colorado versus Virginia. It's a regional area on when you need to adjust those jacks and how the house is doing. I find that houses that aren't that do not have an AC system, they're able to expand and contract a little greater because you're not keeping that constant humidity. That's a good question.
Do you have to screw and unscrew the jack?
Sometimes, yes. So if you have a jack here and you have a jack over here, and you screwed this one until it's tight, and you screwed that one until it's tight, but this side of the house is moving a little more because the bathroom is on that side of the house, and you're producing more humidity, so that one's moving more or moving less than this side, then you have to adjust for that. So if you're not using a ventilation fan and you go into a bathroom and you're seeing high levels of condensation, you might see a little more of movement in the logs itself. That's a good question. Thank you.
How about summer and winter unscrewing?
No, again, it depends. It depends on the house. If you're keeping the house, keeping the house at a constant humidity, basically a constant temperature, most people keep a log home right at about 76 degrees. They generally don't super cool the house or super heat the house. The only time I do see an issue with that versus summer and winter is when somebody has a nice piping hot wood stove and they're super heating the house, they're drying out the wood inside. You're going to have some drastic temperature changes. You're going to have some humidity loss within the logs, and you're going to have some movement within the logs. So you might see some differences there, which you'll have to look at as far as the jacks. But as far as testing the jacks, I would not go around at all, even though I've done this before when I've built log homes, and adjust the jacks. Don't do it. The best way to look at a jack to see if it needs adjustment is just to touch it. Tap it with a screwdriver, touch it, see if the nuts turn. If the nuts turn, then it's too loose. If the jack itself moves at the top or bottom base, then it's too loose. It needs to be adjusted and report accordingly. But don't do it yourself. because you could throw the whole system off. And a lot of people that are really versed in log homes, like the homeowner should be, they know when they need to adjust in which logs to adjust at certain times. Great question. Any more questions? Those are great. I love those. Yeah.
How about condensation on cathedral ceilings or anything like that? Is it more in a log home or less, or?
A log home breathes much easier than a standard house. So you're not going to get as much condensation buildup underneath the sheathing or the substrate of the roof line as much as you would a normal house. I normally don't see any major issues. Where I see more issues are penetrations in the roof. Everybody wants natural light in a log home. A log home is naturally going to be darker than any other standard stick-built house. And so a lot of people like this house, they'll put in skylights. And so all of these penetrations in a roof, it opens up yourself to failure or roof leaks in the future. Sorry to talk bad about you.
4 of those.
No, it's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
I did have one more question. Talk about how the cabinets are attached so they stay level when the logs settle.
Okay, great question. So they must know about this. So on these, what they'll do is put a buffer on the backside of this with a piece of all thread. And the all thread will be, so there's a space between the cabinets. Well, in a kit home, you don't necessarily need to do that because all the logs are uniform. So come on in. So all the logs are uniform. So generally what they'll do is put the cabinets, they'll drill the cabinets anchored right to the logs. And there's not generally a whole lot of movement, but logs that are susceptible to high movement, or they were felled on site and they expand and contract greatly, or they're double Ds, or round logs. Some people call them round logs. So they'll put a piece of all thread there, and you're able to adjust and control how that cabinet sits against the wall. There's other methods, but I haven't seen any other method that is better than that spacer. And it's kind of the same thing as a jack. That way you can control it because yes, the logs do move in and out, and they adjust, and they'll cant in, they'll count out at the top, and so cabinets. If you walk into a log home and the cabinet doors are all coming out like that, I'm sorry to show the inside of your cabinets. The cabinet doors are falling out, and you shut them and they fall back. You know that there might be an issue with how the cabinets are attached to the wall.
Do you have anything to say about half log homes?
Half log homes, like a log veneer, is that what we're talking about? Well, a half log home, well, there's 2 different types of half logs. Some people call half log homes as log veneers. So they'll take the log, the round part of the log, and they'll saw it down to about 2 inches. And then they'll put that against the house.
Like what we saw on the foundation.
Exactly, kind of like what we saw on the foundation. And they'll attach that, and it's more or less the siding, a veneer. You look at those the same exact way as you would any other log home. You look at the checking the same way. You look at the cracks, the space the same way. The beauty of those is if you ever have an issue, you just take the log facing off and replace it. Another type of half log home is where you have mostly kit homes. Some of the older homes that we saw earlier today, where the main log structure, the envelope of the house, went to a certain point, which is halfway up the house, and then you would do stick built from that point on. They would still do half logs on that. That's exactly how this house that we're in today is. You have logs all the way up into a certain point, and then you do stick built up to make the roof line, and then you would do half logs or like a log veneer or siding.
He clarified and said not a veneer, just really thin logs.
Yeah, really thin logs. You would inspect that the same way. There's really no difference on how you would inspect that. The cost is going to be much lower when it comes to replacing or fixing. So if you're in an area that requires you to do a cost to cure, it's going to be much less. But again, around here in most areas that I've found, a cheap log to replace a log end or a whole log on the side of the wall is going to be around this. For a cheap log is about $500, and they've gone all the way up to $2,000 to $3,000 a log.
What's an average thickness of a log home wall?
Depends. The average thickness is going to be between 8 to 10 inches. But that really all depends on the kit that you're looking at. They have natural log homes where the logs were dead felled, and so they're dead standing trees, and they fell those. And at the trunk, obviously, it's going to be wider than at the top of that, but they'll use the entire log for that. And so you can have different thicknesses at one end of the house versus the other end of the house. But some people really like that. The $40 million house that I talked about in the magazine that was built by 22 architects in Upper Michigan Peninsula. A lot of what's in that house have different variances in log thickness.
Are there certificates, like a label, like you find in a manufactured home and a kit home? And a kit log?
Sometimes they do put those on here. A lot of times they'll put a stamp on the outside. I don't know if this one has one, but a lot of times they'll put them on the inside cabinets. Good question.
Back to the cabinets. Have you ever seen them mounted on plywood with slots in it?
I have. The problem with plywood with slots is that the plywood moves with the wall, and so it's harder to adjust versus that all thread method where there's nuts where you can bring it out from the wall however you want them. But yeah, I have seen that method. I've seen that method fail, unfortunately, because the person that installed it didn't know how to install the plywood backer to the log itself. But hey, good question. Any other questions? We're going through them. Hey, I greatly appreciate you guys coming out tonight and spending some time with me and kind of getting into my life and understanding what part of my love of home inspections are and kind of what my niche is in inspecting log homes. I will be presenting a class, not this coming up IW, but following up IW in log home construction and inspections. So hopefully you guys can stay tuned with that. I appreciate Hollis and Sean and all the OMG family for allowing me to spend time with you guys tonight. Again, check out May 2019, the ASHI Reporter. Check out this article. Keep it with you. You can grab the link and put it on your phone so you can pull it up anytime you have a log home. If you guys want to put my phone number in the link there in the messages, you guys can call me up anytime that you guys see a log home and you have any burning questions. Just text me, email me. I'll be more than happy to share my knowledge with you guys. And if I don't know the answer right offhand, I know the experts that do this, and I know an expert that's been doing this for 60 years now, been building log homes. And so I can easily call this guy up and get you some real good quality answers if I don't know him personally.
What's your phone number?
Phone number is 540-836-0256.
540-826.
836.
836.
There you go.
0256. And Sean put it in the chat so you guys can have that. Text me if you want my email address, if you want to stay in contact with me there. I'm in contact with OMG. I'm also an ASHI reporter as one of the directors of ASHI, so you can get my phone number there if you'd like. Also on Facebook, look me up, Inspector Homes Inc. on Facebook, or my name, Bronson Anderson, and pick my brain, and I'll be more than happy to share my love of log homes with you guys.
All right. All right. Well,
Thank you guys.
Okay, well, thank you, Bronson. Good job. With a good round of applause. I can hear the clapping now. I just sent the sign out. There you go. The people are actually clapping. So the sign out is roll, ROLL. It was log or roll. So everybody, if you got the sign out text, please sign out with the token roll. Mark your calendar for December,
I think.
I think it's the 4th.
Yeah.
We've got another interesting topic coming up. And if you do not have a certificate by tomorrow morning, yeah, go ahead and it may take a few minutes for you to get the text message. If you do not have a certificate by tomorrow morning, please send an email to info@cyberashi.org, and we will be sure to get a certificate to you. So,
Cool.
I'm gonna sign off for now and load up and head back north and see if I can get at least a half a night's sleep before I have to get up and hit it again tomorrow. So thanks to everybody. See you next month.
Thanks, guys.
Yo, I have another log home. Over on the farm.
Oh, do you?
It's double this size.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So if y'all need to ever do another one on